We welcome Senator Brandon Creighton, Republican from Conroe, representing District 4, to the show. Of course, Vice Chairman now for Business and Commerce. Welcome to the show.
Right. Thank you, Paul. Appreciate that.
You've got several bills that we want to talk about, all dealing with the franchise tax. And, you know, I talk about taxes and my head starts spinning, and I'm sure a lot of Texans feel the same way. But to try to, as you've said in the past, chip away at the franchise tax, we've got to know what it is. And so we've had a business tax of some sort for a long time, but this is kind of dealing with the modern day franchise tax, right?
Correct. You know, there was an effort in 2003 to 2005 to buy down local property taxes and reduce the burden of increasing appraisal creep and other issues that property taxpayers are feeling right now by implementing a gross margins tax, a franchise tax across all businesses. And ultimately that didn't work because through appraisal creep and heightened appraisal values, it was washed out within a couple of years.
So this is why, I mean, ultimately with this legislation that we'll talk one by one here, you want to eventually phase out the franchise tax entirely.
Yes, one bill that I've filed as a signature piece of legislation for this session is to sunset the franchise tax over a period of time. By 2020, it would ask Comptroller Hager to assess different alternatives. We talk about a lot of times the void that repealing the franchise tax would leave in the state budget. Right. But I've found through a CEO advisory committee that I've established in my district of very respectable business leaders that have deep concerns about the franchise tax and how it's worked over time, that they don't necessarily expect anything less than fair taxation across the board from the business community, but a gross margin itself. A tax right off the top of gross revenue, even if you take a loss that year, is certainly something that's opposite of what we all have stood for in Texas for generations, which is an independent spirit, an entrepreneur, a risk taker, and to reward that.
So basically trying to find a different approach to taxing businesses that you feel expect to be taxed, just not in the way they're taxed now.
Correct. I think, you know, a fair set of definitions that are predictable and that where businesses understand where they stand, and knowing that if they reinvest in their business, that they're not going to be penalized by the state government if ultimately they don't make a profit that year. And right now, that's just not the case.
So you say 2020 would be about the time that you would like to see it phased out, but in the meantime, you'd like to see some immediate changes. What would that be? What would that entail? That's another bill.
Yeah, since I came into the legislature, and I served in the House before this Senate term for 8 years, and there have been about 20 pieces of legislation that have had the intent of chipping away at the franchise tax. I've carried 7, mostly dealing with the exemption, the $1 million exemption that has removed in between 70 and 80,000 businesses from the tax rolls, but we have a long way to go. So this session we're looking at ways to combine those deductions, compensation, cost of goods sold, and that $1 million exemption to give businesses true relief while we work on this sunset or repeal.
So in the meantime then, if you're successful in this aspect with the immediate change, while the comptroller would look at how to maybe change the way businesses are taxed down the line, how would you make up the difference in the immediate future? Is it based on better revenue projections that we have now?
Well, how we would make up the difference on the amount of revenue the franchise tax is bringing in now versus having that revenue absent for the budget itself. We're not, for one of my bills, we're not in that predicament because we're just looking at alternatives to that gross margin over time and an ultimate sunset or repeal in 2020. For other pieces of legislation where we're combining deductions, then there would be a fiscal note to that. But you and I both know that Texas stepped up to the plate in 2009 and found over $16 billion when we had to. So government can be run leaner, and I'm confident that when we reduce taxes, we generate more revenue, and that's by design. So.
And even taking it a step further, a third bill, and I think a joint resolution also, You talk about maybe taking, and I guess when things are phased out, taking whatever money, the unencumbered balance, I'll let you explain the unencumbered balance, would go to the, part of it would go to the rainy day fund?
Yes, well, right now, if we have an unencumbered or unallocated amount of state revenue, after we pass our budget for 2 years, at the end of that fiscal biennium, if there's an amount of money that is unspent, then that amount of money should be returned where it came from, to its rightful owners, to the business owners, to the taxpayers. And that's not how we do it right now. The way the law is today, that unencumbered balance, part of it goes into the general revenue fund and part of it goes to the rainy day fund. My legislation would take the part that goes into the rainy day fund and rebate it right back to the franchise taxpayers.
We just heard from Senator Jay Nelson, Chairman for Finance, with the base budget and talking about approximately $4 billion overall for tax relief, and the figure out there of about $1 billion dealing with business tax or franchise tax relief. How does that jive, if you will, with this legislation that you're talking about?
Well, it's a good start. The base budget shows a commitment from Senator or Chairman Nelson's hard work during the interim to craft a base budget based on hours and hours and hours of stakeholder input, and I want to congratulate her for all of her hard work to start this process during the session. The Lieutenant Governor has definitely been very serious about the same, but you know, I have to state my case, and in that amount of money that's allocated for tax relief, I have to, in hearings with community input and input from businesses all over Texas, I have to state the case that what this particular measure would ultimately end up as part of that overall tax reduction package, that it should compete and compete well, and I plan to do that.
Do you feel like you have support not only in the Senate but perhaps down the line in the House, even among Democrats?
I do. I mean, I think it was you know, one of the highest polling issues across the state that something needs to be done about the franchise tax for reform or repeal. And my package of bills is definitely addressing both efforts. But among my colleagues, yes, I'm finding that it's a prevailing sentiment that we need to take action and make sure that we maximize our time here towards speaking to this very issue, because we're the job creation engine of North America, and it's up to us while we're in session to protect that. And this is a key way that we will do so.
Well, the budget process is in full speed ahead now. Senator Creighton, thanks very much for being with us.
Appreciate it, Paul. Thank you.
You bet. And we're back with more Capital Tonight right after this.